friends, this is Trish, and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we have a very exciting guest named Catherine, and she's going to tell us about the absolutely shocking experience she had when she switched from teaching at a Catholic school to a public school. And spoiler alert, it was a nightmare, but she's going to tell us all about it. But let's go ahead and get started. Catherine, I'd love to know, what were some of the things you noticed with student behavior?
They were very different in a sentence. So the behavior even at the Catholic school wasn't perfect because kids are kids. You have to expect some level of inappropriate behavior, disrespectful. Kid is having a bad day and all that, but it never reached the point of like, what on earth is going on with this? It all stayed within the range of, okay, this is what I would expect from kids of this age. At the public school though, very, very different. And the thing is, like, there were a lot of really, really great kids. Some kids who rarely, if ever, had any behavior issues. There were kids who, kind of fell within that range of good day, bad day, and just sometimes kids are kids. But then there were a lot of kids who were on this other extreme where it's just, what on earth, what is going, like, what is making this happen? What is causing you to behave in this way? And when I went in, like at the beginning of the school year, you always have those couple of days of in-service training, professional development, whatever you want to call it. And a lot of the stuff that came up is that, like, yeah, there are a lot of kids in this area with difficult home lives, and it is true. This is the area that we moved into. There's a lot of low income. There's a lot of issues with drug addiction. There's a lot of families, single parents. One parent is incarcerated. One parent is working multiple jobs just to pay the basic expenses. So there's a lot of socioeconomic factors that definitely contribute to this. But the way that it manifests in the schools is there are a lot of behavior issues at all, and as I understand it, at all levels. In just a lot of the things that you hear about, violence, doing things like vaping in the bathroom, doing other inappropriate things. Like at one point I stepped out of my door at the end of the day, and there's a there's a feminine hygiene product just stuck to the wall, and it's like, what? I can't remember if it was used or not, but it was a feminine hygiene product just stuck to the wall outside my room. It's like, okay. Obviously, I brought that to the attention of the janitorial staff, and it was gone pretty quickly. But still, bullying, issues with technology. I would go so far as to call it phone addiction. Everything that you have heard about from others. I could go on and on. And if you would like some specific stories, yes, I have some of those.
Oh yeah, we love stories around here. Go for
Okay.
it.
All right. So stories. Probably the one that the first one that happened, which happened within the first 2 or 3 weeks of the 2023-2024 school year starting, was some classroom bullies. It ended up that there were 2 of them. Only one of them was obvious about it. The other one was being a little more subtle about it, as I found out later. And they were bullying a kid. And together. And eventually the kid the kid who was being bullied very much eventually just reacted to it. Attempted to punch one of the bullies in the face, like right in front of me. And I, in retrospect, I should not have done this, but I could see it was about to happen. So I did. I'm going to scooch forward so I can kind of demonstrate. I did like a little kind of body block where put my arms out in front of me like this and kind of went forward to kind of just get between them without touching them. I managed to touch them. But it did stop the punch from happening. Now, I probably shouldn't have done that in retrospect. And I didn't have anything go wrong to me because of that. And when I, went and spoke to the building administrators later, they did tell me, like, like, yeah, that was a risky move, but it makes sense. It's a human reaction, to be like, this kid is about to hurt another. And, you you want to prevent that harm from being done. Um, but then after that happened, the kid who was reacting to the bullies then went on to destroy stuff that belonged to one of the bullies. It was a binder. He ripped it up, ripped out all the paper. It was very close to the end of class, so everybody was kind of on their way out anyway. So it could have been quite a bit worse. And I was able to call in one of the specialists for crisis management, and it was also my last class right before lunch. So I already had a break coming up. And my understanding of what happened afterwards, so the kid who was being bullied was rescheduled into another class to be removed from the room with the ones who were bullying that kid. So that was good. But then my understanding after that was that the only person who had to apologize in that scenario was the kid who was being bullied, had to apologize to the kid whose binder was destroyed. But I know that was a thing that happened, but I never heard about anything that the bullies had to do to make things right with the kid who they were bullying. And I don't think I need to say anything else for why I'm kind of scratching my head over that,
Definitely. Yeah, it's so hard because I remember just especially teaching middle schoolers, a lot of times,
yeah, I was in middle school.
Yeah, the kids that were the biggest bullies, when I would try to talk to their parents, the parents were convinced that they were the ones being bullied. And it was like 9 out of 10 that would happen. And so that's so frustrating when there is a situation that happens and the kid that's being bullied is, pushed to the edge or made to look like they're the one that is starting things. And so I saw a lot of that, especially working with middle schoolers.
I felt it was a little bit backwards. And the thing is, I agreed that the kid who was being bullied, yes, should be held responsible for destroying something that belongs to somebody else. I'm on board with that. I'm very much on board with that. What I'm not so on board with is the fact that, as I understand it, the kids who did the bullying, they never had to apologize. Nothing was really done with them, and they continued to be in the class together, and they may have gone on to bully other vulnerable kids. And I'm just like, okay, we're 50% of the way there, but what about the other 50%? And unfortunately, this was a recurring pattern where, kids who were bullying oftentimes, despite all of the, bullying is bad and we shouldn't bully and, reach out to people if you're being bullied. And it's like, okay, but what I'm seeing here is that the kids who are bullied or are doing the bullying, never seem to have any consequences for their behavior. They never seem to have to apologize. Nothing's ever done with them because to me, yes, the kids who are doing the bullying and the kid who was being bullied, yes, they should have been taken away and out of separate rooms. But when you take the victim of the situation and move them, it easily looks like they're the one who's being punished. Something is being done with them instead of the ones who are doing the thing that they shouldn't be doing.
Definitely. I think something that I've noticed that's changed a lot since I was a student was a lot of the bullying has, leaked over from peer to peer to basically students to teachers, where teachers are really getting targeted and bullied by kids. And when I taught private school, 7th and 8th grade, I genuinely felt like I was being bullied nonstop. Kids were making memes about me. They were making rumors about me. Yes. They were trying to get me fired. And it was the most horrible feeling ever. Yes. I would be standing and doing parking lot duty, and all of the kids would be circled up, basically pointing and laughing at me and making memes. And it was just horrible. Did you see or experience anything like that when you were teaching public school?
Yep. Definitely did. This happened right before the holiday break, Christmas break. And it was not too long after that I put in what medical leave for mental health that then turned into resignation. And what happened was I had a student who I was on. I remember this well. I was on the phone with one of the building administrators because I had a very rough time with one of my classes that day. I had to do multiple write-ups that warranted communication home, and I had been using my lunch, because of course I was, to try and make that contact over the phone, because the policy was, after there's been this many write-ups for a student, you have to call home. It was emphasized call home. That was in the beginning of the year, procedures, policies, etc. And I had so many that I couldn't get through all the calls. So, and I wanted to make sure that the assistant principal knew I was doing my due diligence, but it's like I ran out of time. So I wanted to give her a quick call, and I said, just so you know, I know I wrote up a bunch of kids from this period. I made phone calls for these kids. But I can't make the rest until after school hours. I just want you to know that this is what I will be doing. And while I was on the phone there, a student took my picture through the clear windows that you often see alongside the door. And at the time, there had also been some, it had come to my attention, there were some rumors circulating that I was getting divorced. I didn't know where these had started, and I'm like what is going on? I think it might be because at the time I was really beginning to feel the mental stress of working there, and sometimes I couldn't always hold it together. And I think some of the kids were beginning to be aware, like something's not right there, and it spun into this whole thing that I was getting divorced, which I wasn't, obviously. But anyways, a kid took my picture through the window and posted it to social media with a caption. I can very much remember the exact words, but if it is okay with you, I would rather not share them. I like the exact words, but I will say that it brought up, like, she's getting divorced. Very unflattering, very insulting, as you can imagine. It ended up on social media. And I had some others approach me a couple days after that, and they showed it to me. And I again called the building administration, and I tried all of them, and I did manage to reach one of them. And I said, "Hey, can I send a couple of students down?" Because I had brought it to the attention of admin that, like, there was something going around on social media about me, and they said, and like, I understand where they were coming from, and they said, "Yeah, we've heard this too, but until we have some kind of evidence, proof, whatever, there's nothing that we can really do." And it's like, fair enough, that makes sense. Well, now I had that, and I sent, and I said, can I send them down to show this to you? They went right down. They met with the building admin. They showed it, and the responsible student was, they did have a meeting there. But again, I think the best way to put it is, like, I think that the building administrators, they did what they could within the constraints imposed on them, I think. But ultimately, I was just kind of like, if this happened in basically any context other than a school, this could this could potentially be illegal, because the state where I'm in, if I'm reading the laws correctly, it is a two-party consent state in order to photograph, record. So you can't just, I think it's something like, if there is a reasonable expectation of privacy, it's a two-party consent. Otherwise, it is illegal. And that was my understanding after just checking some of this out. That was the understanding of the union as well. So that was a thing. But ultimately, that the only thing that happened, that student had a meeting with the SRO to talk about cyberbullying and all this other stuff. It's like, okay, cool. Student was on phone suspension for a while. Okay, cool, I suppose, but we all know that they're going to sneak those phones in. And that was, and I think maybe like a couple of days, I think, of like lunch detention or after school detention or something. So there were some of those other traditional methods, but that was about it. And the thing that struck me the most is that the student responsible, again, never had to come to me, never had to look me in the eye and say, yeah, this is a thing that I did and I'm sorry. Never had to face up. And then I had to continue working with that student, knowing full well what they did. And like, again, that happened shortly before Christmas, and then the Christmas break hits, and it's like, okay, I can get some downtime, I can try to kind of okay, get ready for this, but then when we go back, it was like, I know, like, that was my, and I had to continue having the student. I did approach and ask, like, hey, I don't think I can do this, because I do very much value my privacy. I've kind of cut a lot of social media out of my life at this point. So having that done very much felt like a violation of my privacy and my rights. So I asked, like, is there any way that he can get put in a different class? I was told, again, like, we'll look into this, but we can't make any promises, because the thing is, the way it was structured is I was doing all the 7th grade science except for a small handful of classes. There were some who were in like a small group with another teacher, and then there was another teacher who had, you know, like a full normal size class, and there was pretty much nowhere to move him because I was the teacher doing almost all of that. And ultimately, it was just like I can't keep doing this, and that was one of the things that led to me putting in for a mental health medical leave, because it's like I can't keep doing this. And also my husband did he could see the effect that this was having on me, and he also like encouraged me, like, you don't need to do this, check and see if there's something that you can do before just handing in a resignation. But if there's a way you can give yourself some space, go ahead and do that. But yes, I did in that moment, especially since the rumors continued to persist and all that. Like, yes, it did feel a little bit like bullying. And again, I know that in any other context other than school, there would have been some potentially very serious consequences for the student who did that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember that feeling all too well, and I'm so sorry that that happened to you. And I just totally agree that these kids are learning that their actions have no consequences in the real world. Because similar to you, I mean, what the 7th and 8th graders were doing to me could easily be considered libel, slander. They were making up career-ending rumors about me and spreading them. And just like you mentioned with the other students that were constantly bullying this one kid that finally, exploded and had enough, I just think that this weird systems like, PBIS or these restorative practices, they're basically teaching kids essentially that, you can poke a bear and absolutely nothing's going to happen. You're going to maybe be able to talk about your feelings and, write out an apology letter, best case scenario in these schools. And then they're like, that's it. Everything's great. But it's so scary because, I feel like we're facilitating like little sociopaths that have no empathy, that have no feeling, that have no idea the kind of damage that they can do to people. And I just remember even trying to talk to the kids myself, thinking that, 7th and 8th graders, they should, start to develop a little bit of empathy, and just telling them, that, and this is probably not a great, idea in retrospect, but I told them, like, I'm having to cry myself to sleep. Like, you guys are truly hurting me. Because at my particular school, it was a Christian, private school. So I'm thinking like, bare minimum, we should be teaching people the golden rule, like do to others as you would have them do to you. And only to find out that the kids ended up complaining to their parents. And I got all these nasty emails about how unprofessional I was, and that I shouldn't be a teacher if I couldn't handle middle schoolers being middle schoolers. And so I just kind of just wanted to pause on how helpless and how alone teachers feel in those situations, because it's being like trapped in a box and you're just waiting for, what are people going to do? Is somebody going to decide to get in a fight? What do I do then? Are kids going to basically make fun of me straight to my face? Then what do I do? And that is just not a mentally healthy situation for anybody. Not the toughest person in the world, should have to endure those kind of working conditions, especially when, like you said, if that were in the workplace, theoretically that person should get fired. There would be HR complaints, there could be lawsuits. But yeah, if it happens in K through 12, it's like a free for all pass. Yeah. And so I'm curious, what did your school have, like a formal discipline program that they tried to enact, or what was that like?
Well, you mentioned PBIS, and that was it. And like here's the thing with like the positive behavior intervention stuff. I like the core of it. I like the idea of it, emphasizing the positive kind of behavior. That's great. But the thing is, positive inherently comes with the opposite side of negative. Okay? Like you can't just have positivity. The term toxic positivity has become a thing for a reason. And it's because like too much positivity can be just as bad as too much negativity. There's a balance. They go together. It's like, the two sides of the coin, the yin yang, whatever you want to think of it as. You can't have one without the other. And that's, again, that's kind of the problem. So you mentioned, they can poke the bear, and nothing happens. Well, the thing is, if you find an actual bear out in the woods, especially if it's a mother bear with cubs, and you poke the bear, that bear is going to stand up and, just whack you with a paw that's the size of your head. That's kind of the way it actually works, because out in the real world, there are actual consequences. And to use a slightly more relatable analogy, even though the analogy I just used is actually kind of a realistic one where I live, but to use a more relatable analogy, it doesn't even have to like be a job. Think about like just going to like the grocery store or to the library or something like that. If you treat the staff of the grocery store, the staff of the library, the way that teachers often get treated, like you're going to be escorted out. You're going to be escorted out and possibly told, and you're not welcome back either. Because that's kind of the way the real world works. But you're 100% right that what they're getting is there's all the focus on the positive behavior, and that's all well and good, but we're not kind of going into this whole negative behavior, and there's a lot of those negative consequences in the real world. It's not all sunshine and flowers and rainbows and unicorns and roses and all that kind of stuff in the real world, as we all know. But then K to 12, that's kind of what it's become, and what negative behaviors there are, or negative consequences there are, I'm sorry. What negative consequences there are, like a lot of the kids, they just don't care because they're consequences that are kind of meaningless to them. It might be like, I got ASD, or a lunch detention or something, or goodness, out of school suspension is basically a vacation day for them. For a lot of them, it's like, I don't get to go to school today. I'm going to just sit on my computer and play Fortnite all day. It's like that's almost a reward for them. Which then just reinforces the negative, or reinforces the negative behavior rather. So it's for me, it's one of those things where it's like the positive behavior, emphasizing the positive, rewarding the positive. Yeah, we're doing that, but even that I feel like isn't being done well, because we've gotten to the point where for some students, it's almost like just showing up that day is a big reward. Whereas then you have then you have like the kids that are actually trying to understand what they're in school for. They don't disrupt the class. And there were a lot of kids like that. I really did work with some really, really awesome, great, smart, hardworking kids at the public schools. They're there. But for them, it's just kind of, they see all the chaos around them, and oftentimes they're not getting rewarded for doing things like showing up, for just coming with a pencil or something, because their standards are so high. But even to them, it's like, having been one of those students at school, like I'm not going to sit here and say that I was perfect or anything, because I was not, but I knew what I was there for. It probably helps that that one of my parents was a elementary aide focusing on reading, and also, of course, my parents would not have been happy if I was misbehaving in school. So I generally kept myself together. But from that perspective, looking at that, be like, boy, I would feel like this is one of the most unfair things. That it's like, this kid's getting rewarded just for showing up. Meanwhile, I'm getting nothing for, showing up consistently, doing my work. And then when I'm done with my work, I have a book to read, or I'm going to draw. I had some really, really talented artistic students too, that just had a sketchbook with them. And if they finished their work early, they just start drawing, and they would show me their drawings. And some of them were awesome. But they're not getting rewarded for that the same way that some of these other kids get big rewards just for showing up for the day. And so, like, we're rewarding the positive, but even that doesn't seem like it's being done in a way that's fair and equitable and helps everybody and shows everybody the value of the positive behavior. So it just all seems out of whack. We're doing, at least in my experience, both sides were present, but neither side was really being done particularly well. And, once you get up to middle school as well, then you start getting into the attitude of, well, I'm too cool for this. So ultimately, you also had a lot of students that didn't care about getting those positive behavior points. So they weren't really motivated by that either. So it's like, okay, what do we do here? So it's all out of whack. And a big thing for me is, I know I mentioned before that this is a low income area. There's a lot of parents, a lot of families, where there's single parent, one of the parents is incarcerated. The parents are working multiple jobs just to pay, the basic expenses. And with that in mind, like this is just kind of feeding, what we often hear about the school to prison pipeline, because it's just feeding it in a different way, because the kids go to K to 12, and one way or the other, the message that they get is, oh, well, there's no consequences if I'm, if I'm fighting other people, if I'm hitting other people, if I'm on my phone all day, if I'm taking pictures of people without their permission and posting it to social media, there's no consequences. And then all of a sudden they turn 18, and then all of a sudden there's consequences. A judge isn't going to care about your IEP or 504. Like, they don't care. That's not relevant. And yet that's what's going on. We seem to think that there's this magical switch in the brain that the moment you turn 18, it just flicks on, and it's like, oh, I'm going to be functional now. But that's not the way it works. That's what happens. It does kind of feed the school to prison pipeline, just in a different way. And I know that you've mentioned before, in some of your videos or interviews, you've mentioned like the zero tolerance policies from the 90s and the 2000s. And I was in school with those. And they were definitely imperfect. They had their problems too. And they were kind of too far onto the negative over the positive. But it seems like now we're doing this overcorrection. And now we've been overcorrecting for long enough that now we're seeing the problems with the overcorrection. And I feel like I'm afraid that like what's going to happen is we're then just going to overcorrect again. And we're never going to find this middle area that's going to work better for everyone.
Definitely. And I think too, it would be bad enough if the schools weren't so dysfunctional, but then parents are not holding their kids accountable either. And I think that was what frustrated me so much, because I think in the olden days, it's like school was one line of defense against crazy behavior, bad, a bare minimum, back in my day, if you
Yep.
had your parents called, you were in trouble. And, even back in my day, we had something called grounding. I never hear like Gen Alpha kids talk about getting grounded, but it's like
Yes.
your Super Nintendo's gone, your TV's gone, you're not going to play with your friends, and it doesn't even have to be like you mentioned, these super, super harsh extreme punishments, but you essentially have to get in touch with what the kid cares about, and you have to take that away. And I remember even when I was like too old to be grounded, my mom said, you know what, I'm taking your makeup. And even then I was like, melted into a pool of tears. I was like, I'll do anything. Don't take my makeup. And so, it's funny now, but it's like there has to be something that can be touched within that kid where they say, oh no, I don't want this to happen. And it's like, if we can't do that at school, and we know that getting, calling home, their parents are not going to do anything. You're totally right. The last line of defense is the justice system. And that is not always going to be something that, the kid can just get themselves out of right away.
Yeah. And to what you said there, it's like, that was my experience growing up. It's just like, if I misbehaved at school or at home, like, there would be a consequence. And yes, as it turns out, you can have negative consequences without any kind of physical punishment or anything that is actually abusive. And like you said, like I would, my parent, I like to play video games as a kid. You mentioned the Super Nintendo. Okay, so I didn't have a Super Nintendo. I had a Sega Genesis, but it was still like, okay, you can't play the Sega Genesis for the rest of the week, or, you can't watch TV, or you can't do this, just taking away a privilege for some period of time, usually not too hugely long, but some period of time, as well as, of course, going, who had I wronged? Well, going to that person, looking them in the eye and saying, I did this thing that was wrong and I'm sorry, like learning to, and that's a valuable skill to have, because even as adults, sometimes you do something stupid, you make a mistake, you say the wrong thing. We've all done it. We've all been there. And it's a valuable skill to be able to go up to somebody and say, hey, you know what? I screwed up. I said this. I know it hurt because, whatever. I'm sorry, go up and make amends and repair, try to repair things to the best you can. That's a valuable skill. And that's being taken away from them. And also what you mentioned though is it's like, yeah, I am seeing a lot of parents just not really stepping up. And at least I know in this area here, like there's reasons, like I want to make the distinction between reason and excuse. They're not the same thing. But I know that one of the reasons here is because, again, I've mentioned lots of single parents. And those single parents working multiple jobs just to pay the basic bills. But there are also just a lot of parents that just they the unfortunate reality is there are a lot of parents that just don't really care. Or there's also a lot of parents that just aren't well informed, and they don't really know the impact that they may be having on their children by not doing the things that they should be doing, or something like that. There's all kinds of things that play into it. And again, I want to differentiate reason and excuse. I'm not excusing it, but there are other reasons behind why it's happening. And I do think that to help these problems in the schools, there are these other completely separate socioeconomic factors that are causing a lot of the problems at the school. Again, in low income, working multiple jobs, so the parents don't really have time to engage with their kids. And I certainly know that at the public school, a lot of those kids, they go home and what are they doing all day? Oh, they're on TikTok. They're on Instagram, or they're playing Fortnite until 3 a.m. or something. And it's oftentimes because there's nobody stopping them. And in the case of all of those things that I mentioned, along with many more, they're designed to be addictive, and they're addictive to adults. So we can only imagine how addictive they are to a developing brain.
I'm curious, bringing up just the topic of phones and social media. Did you see that kind of leaching into the classroom a lot in your middle school world?
Oh yes, oh yes, definitely. Kids, like a lot of the kids had phones. And I know I've mentioned that this is a low income area, and yet so many of the kids had phones that were way newer than mine. While I was teaching there, I still had an iPhone 8 that I had for, oh goodness, 4 or 5 years at that point. But I had kids who were on the whatever the newest high grade iPhone is. I can't remember what number we're on now. It's like what, 14 or 15 or something. But so many of these students that have the newest thing. Okay, it was, I think, yeah, it was earlier this year, where there was all this craze about Stanley Cups. Right? Okay. Like, yes, there were kids who had these monstrous $45 Stanley Cups because they were the cool thing. Even though, and I'm just scratching my head, like, what do you need this for? Like, again, like they're like this tall, they're enormous, and they're like 45, $50. I would hear kids talking about drunk elephant, the drunk elephant makeup, all those expensive makeups, Sephora, even though I don't even know where the nearest Sephora is. I'm out in a very kind of, I don't want to say very rural, but it is rural. We're surrounded by national forest out here. I have no idea where the closest Sephora is. And if I had to take a guess, it is most likely in a city that is about an hour and a half drive away.
Wow.
Okay. So I hear kids talking about that, and that's kind of how I got keyed into some of these TikTok trends. And I'm just like, and yes, I did witness a little bit of bullying, some other things about whatever the TikTok trend of the moment was. Again, like, that's not a Stanley Cup. And of course, now, like, we're in June and it's like Stanley Cups are no longer the cool thing. I don't know what the cool water bottle is now. And I know I'm kind of fixating on the Stanley a bit, but that was a thing that I witnessed, that I learned is like, oh, that's a social media thing. Okay. But besides that, so it was around, it was right after Thanksgiving that, it became obvious that the phones were a big problem. So in the middle school at my grade level, all the teachers, we got the little shoe hangers, that you hang on a door, and the students were to put their phones in the hangers there as they come in. Now, the problem is, of course, enforcing it, and then what is going to be the consequences and all that of, if you're caught with a phone. And lo and behold, of course, I'm catching multiple kids with their phones all the time. And it's always, oh, I forgot. Oh, this, oh, that. And always like, please don't make this a write up because blah, blah, blah reason. Or, I would have students that are like, oh, this is a text from my mom. And it's like, and I'm just like, why are the parents even contacting their kids when they know the kid is at school? So it was wild, all this stuff with the phones. I students with multiple phones, like a dummy one to put in the pocket, and then another one to actually keep. And of course, yes, playing games on the phone in class, texting in class, watching TikTok in class, whatever. And the thing is, like, of course, when they're looking at a phone because they're sitting, like this. It's like, how do you think that I don't know what you're doing? You're doing something on a phone. But again, then it's like a subtle little insult. It's like, you think we're stupid. Like, you think we're too stupid to know what you're doing. But for my part, like, eventually it's just like, we tried, but I think one of the problems is it wasn't being done from day one, is one of the issues. And I'm hoping at that school that at the start of the new school year, that's going to be a day one thing, addressing the phones. I don't know. But it for me, at least, it just gradually became one of those things that's like, I'm not so sure this is a fight that I can continue to fight. And especially when it started to come out, the students are taking pictures of each other, recording each other. And of course, when you're a student and you're recording a minor and posting it to social media without their permission, yeah, all of a sudden there's a lot of consequences for you, because then it gets the attention of the world outside school. And then boom, here's the real world. And in the real world, you can't do that.
Definitely. Yeah, when you were talking, it also just made me think, even going back to parenting, the lack of valuing education. And something that I've noticed that is controversial to bring up, but when I've had students come to the US from other countries, even if their parents weren't wealthy, they valued education and they taught and instilled in their kid that education is the way to transcend having a low income. And so they would prioritize their kids' homework. They would show up at parent teacher conferences. The kids were well behaved. And so to me, that kind of blows up the argument that we've been told as teachers that, oh, you've got to feel sorry, for kids that don't have a lot of money, because I've seen other kids that also don't have a lot of money that come to school valuing education. And so I totally agree. We're setting kids up for failure so much with these cell phones. If I were a parent, I'm not, I will say that. But if I were, I would have my kid have a dumb phone, just like the kind that literally only can send and receive text messages and phone calls. There's no way I would let my kid have a smartphone. There's no way that I would let them be on social media. But I went on a cruise about a month ago, and I was trying so hard not to be judgy in my mind. But since I talk about, young people so much, I was watching families with their young people, and I noticed so many parents, we were, sitting outside getting food, and a kid started to scream and wail, and the mom just put an iPad right in their hand, and then the kid calmed down. And I would see that over and over again. And I'm like, don't be judgy, don't be judgy. But it is so sad. It's like, I think parents are losing those skills of like soothing their kids. And I really like attachment theory. So it is kind of frightening to think about, what are these kids' attachment styles going to be like if from their toddlerhood and younger, they haven't been held or rocked or soothed, they're handed a mechanical device and that device is soothing them. That's a whole nother video topic, but it just made me think of that in this conversation.
Yeah. And I'm not a parent either. I'm not a parent either. I do have my husband and I, we do have a young nephew, but I'm not a parent. But yeah, I certainly see a lot of that as well. So probably the one that struck me the most is my husband and I, we went out to eat on Valentine's Day or over Valentine's Day weekend or something. And that was after I had taken my medical leave. And I was kind of trying to do the same thing, like, I don't want to be judgy. I don't want to be judgy, but then, here comes the family come in. It's a mom, dad, kid. I don't know the age of the kid. Not too terribly old. I would say maybe like somewhere in the in the K to first grade, maybe. And yeah, the kid was on a phone or a tablet the entire time, like not a word really being said to mom and dad. And sometimes I would see mom and dad are on their phones. And it's one of those things. It's just like the kids, they take in and they observe what they see around them. And I do think that a lot of that also, unfortunately, does come down to the way adults tend to behave around their phones, and how many adults can't put their phones down for any length of time. And again, that goes back to what I had been saying about, like, they're designed to be very addictive. It's designed to give you that brief dopamine hit, that brief little shot of dopamine that makes you feel good. And then it goes away. And then you go and look for the next one, and of course there's FOMO alongside that. And it's just this horrible cocktail of just just taking advantage, honestly, of the way the human brain works. And the fact is, like, it works on adults with fully developed brains, so we can only imagine how effective it is on a kid without a fully developed brain. And my father is a psychologist. So he is retired now, but he was a clinical psychologist. So he worked directly with patients, and including patients with various addiction issues. And he still kind of observes a lot of these things, and I've had some conversations with him about, like, tech, and how tech companies, app makers, phone companies and all that, they employ psychologists in order to design the software to be more addictive. And it's just like, and my dad has said, like, yeah, they're kind of using my profession in a very dark way there, but it's true. And this seems to be, one of those addictions that, at least right now, is in a way socially condoned. On the other hand, I do see some glimmers now that we're beginning to be like, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Maybe we shouldn't be giving full iPhones, full iPads with unlimited access to 1-year-olds. Like, this does not seem like a good idea, and this is really messing with their brains. And similarly, a lot of adults, and I know this is an issue here, a lot of adults, how frequently do you think that their kids see them reading a book?
Never.
Yeah, a lot of them never see their parents reading a book. And I think that, like, and that's kind of the other side of the coin, because I know here, I probably had a total of, we'll say, around 150 students. There were less than 10 who I would regularly see reading a book that wasn't whatever they were reading for their English class. And like, this was a regular experience for me. The books that they were reading for English class, they would leave them in my classroom. I would find them with the covers just torn off, and it was a regular thing that's like, okay, end of the day, okay, they're all gone. Okay, here's one of the books, here's one with the cover torn off. And I would go down to the English class for, like, daily delivery of your books that were just left behind. So there's very little, there's a lot of value placed on these things, but very little value placed on reading, on books in any form, which is very, very sad. And I know that, again, these things have taken away the stamina that a lot of kids would need to read successfully. And I find that very, very distressing, because there's a part of me that's like, is that potentially, in some ways at least, like, the antidote to all the issues that we see with tech?
Yeah.
I don't know, but there's a part of me that thinks that on some level, yes, it is.
I just have to tell you a story. I don't even know if you're going to believe me, but this is a real
probably
life
will.
story. So I was talking to a mom about their kids' reading scores, and I kid you not, she says she sees me reading on Twitter all the time. I don't understand why she doesn't have better reading scores. And I just, like, my heart, my internal world just sank. And I was just like, yeah. And I was just like, it was so sad, yet
Oh,
so
no.
like you laugh to like wash away the tears. But
Yes,
I
yes,
really
that's exactly.
think, yeah, it's like people really, really have substituted that in their mind. And so speaking of reading scores, I'm just
Oh
kind of
no.
curious,
Oh no.
what kind of things did you see in terms of academics? I know at least in a lot of my schools, everybody passed no matter what. They switched to standards-based grading, so grades didn't mean anything. So I'm kind of curious what you saw in that regard.
Yeah, not very high academics here. This is definitely a athletics over academics kind of area. Which is that's a whole nother ball game, to excuse the pun, I guess. Um, anyways, yeah, very very low academics. Definitely behind on academics, and this is where I definitely just kind of need to talk about like curriculum a little bit. At the public school, I was given a like scripted pre-made curriculum to use, and I'm kind of of the mind that, like, okay, having that does help with the planning, and I definitely understand that in a district, giving everybody in a grade level the same curriculum is a good way to help ensure that all the students are learning the same thing at ideally the same pace, although this was the first year that the curriculum was implemented. Now, so there are positives to being given one of those scripted curriculums. On the other hand, and of course there's going to be an on the other hand, the this in science, this is what we would call like an inquiry based curriculum or a phenomenon based curriculum. I don't want to say what curriculum it was. What I will say is, in and of itself, as a science teacher, I liked what it was trying to do. It was trying to teach science as like the scientific method of this whole thing of, like, experiments, observe a phenomenon. Why is this phenomenon happening? Exploring that inquiry based, like, I appreciate that. I like what it's trying to do. The issue is that with a lot of the students, like, they had never learned like that. They were much more used to this more kind of being spoon fed the information. So, like, throwing this curriculum at them all of a sudden in middle school, they didn't have the skill base or honestly the background knowledge base to make something like this work. Like, this is one of those things that's like, okay, if they were learning science this way from like first or second grade, yeah, this I could see this working and I could see this being very engaging. But they're coming in like with no background knowledge, very little understanding of like how to actually investigate, what's going on when this happens. There's none of that there. So they just, ultimately what's going to happen is a lot of them, they just check out because it seems like it should be resonating with them, but it's not, because there's not that skill base. There's not knowledge, that background knowledge base. So that that was a thing. It's one of those things that's like that upset me in a way, because it's like, this is a good curriculum in and of itself. It's just a mismatch for the students that I have in front of me. Like, they're not ready for this. And then on top of that, yes, of course, standards. I'm not quite. I'm trying to remember what the exact grading policy was that I had. I can't even. I'm not even sure if it was necessarily standards based grading, because I could still kind of like pick and choose, like, okay, when we do this activity, this will be graded, or I can do like a notebook check kind of grade. So I was given some freedom there, but I was still often the late policy on paper was they could turn in anything before the end of the marking period, or like the midpoint of the marking period, when like there's a progress report that gets sent out that, let's be honest, most of the parents aren't looking at, um unfortunately. And I had to accept it if it was turned in before this point in the marking period, and I would have to grade it. That was on paper. In reality, I was often, unfortunately, like, it led to me having to give a lot of grace. Like, there would be kids that would do nothing in class, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I need to keep on giving them 6 copies of the same assignment because I gave it to them, it got lost, or whatever. It's like, okay, here's another one. So I had to constantly keep copies of like all the work because so many of the kids weren't turning it in when it was done in class. It would get lost. I would give them a new one. I would give them another new one. And of course, like the grades were available online. Students and parents could look at any time to see how things were going. But it would still be like before one of those midpoints or, the end of the marking period before a report card, the reality often was like everybody's scrambling all of a sudden. And now everybody suddenly cares about where this kid is, where that kid is. They're missing this. I don't like this grade. And it's like, and what it functionally led to is, again, when one of these points was happening, a lot of extra work for the teacher. Or of course, sometimes I would also have like, oh, here's the kid who's taking a vacation in the middle of the school year. Do you have a packet of work that I'm just magically supposed to have? And it's like, and sometimes I would be given like 2 days notice before the kid was going to be gone for like 3 weeks. And then of course, when they come back, the expectation is, oh, they need to get caught up. It's like, and like a lot of these trips, they weren't anything that could really be, justified as educational or anything. It's like, no, we're just taking a cruise in the middle of the school year. So academics, it was rough going. A lot of kids behind. A lot of kids that are what I would call functionally illiterate. Kids that are reading and writing so far below grade level, no stamina. Like if the day's activity was like, okay, here's a reading package from, little reading package from the curriculum that's, maybe 5 paragraphs long. Barely the stamina to go through and read it. Can't spell, basic words like through or water or something like that. And I'm like, oh my goodness. It was rough. The academics were very rough. And again, the grading, I had some flexibility, but still I was ultimately off. And it's like, give them the grace. It's like, okay.
So there's kind of a debate within education about whether or not all ability levels should be included in one class. I know in, previous times there might have been gifted education, special education that was separate from the mainstream class, but somewhere along the way they just said, you know what, let's just put everybody together. What was your experience with that?
Not good. Not good. I think that like trying to put all ability levels into one classroom, it's well intentioned. And I do think that if overall class sizes were smaller, that could potentially work. Either smaller class sizes, or if we're going to keep those giant class sizes, there's multiple adults, multiple teachers. Especially if all the adults in that room are certified in whatever the grade level subject is. Then it could work. But the reality is when we're looking at one adult and 30 kids and ability levels that are all over the place, it doesn't work. It doesn't. And the thing is, it doesn't. The worst thing is it doesn't serve the kids. It doesn't serve the kids at all. Because the thing is, if, let's say that you have a student with ADHD, one of the most common things that you're going to see on an IEP for a student with diagnosed ADHD is towards the front of the room, away from distractions. Okay, please tell me where in a room of 30 kids they're going to be away from distractions. Please tell me where that's going to be, especially if there are 30 kids in a room that is way too small for 30 kids.
Yes.
A room that is so small that I'm kind of thinking like, is this even within like fire code? Because I'm not sure that it is. Okay, there is no away from distraction in that scenario. So you're not serving that kid with ADHD. You're just not, because there's 29 other distractions all over the room. And I can't separate that kid from those distractions, because otherwise the only way I could do that is like, here's the kid in the corner in the front, and then just create a wall of, as well as I can, with the kids who are, who do understand like what a classroom is about and how to behave in a classroom, and then put everybody else there. But then the problem becomes, oh, I have 4 or 5 kids that need to be in the front of the room away from distractions. And then, you have the things besides ADHD. Let's go to the other side of the coin here with the advanced students, the gifted students, the accelerated students. When there are 29 other kids in the room, okay, and let's say, I don't know, 10 of them, or no, let's bring that up to like 15, because that was That was a thing for me. 15 of them have an IEP, a 504, some kind of a disability or something. It's like, okay, that's fine. But then, here's the one or two gifted students. And then you have all the average students. And then you have all of the students with various behavioral issues. Those students there, the gifted ones, they also need one-on-one attention in order to enrich their interests, try and push them to analyze things a little bit more deeply. But the reality is that the teacher is going to be spending most of their time with these low kids that, can barely, unfortunately, sometimes can barely read the question on the worksheet, or putting out the fire over here with, a student who's acting up for some reason. And then what time is left to give some one-on-one attention to the gifted kids, to push them to really think deeply, to analyze, to differentiate for them, to enrich them? And it's just like, once again, where's my time to do that? Where are my resources to do that? Why are they being put in the same class with all this around them? And like half of them, like the gifted kids, I could see like they were just hunkering down in a corner like this and just trying to shut out a lot of the chaos around them, and they weren't getting anything out of it. And then of course you have the kids that are within that range of average, and they're not getting anything out of it. So it's one of those things. It's like well-intentioned, especially like for, learning social skills, learning to be around people that aren't like you, learning to accept students with disabilities. Like those are all important things. And I understand that. But when you shove 30 kids together in one room with one adult, you're not serving any one of those 30 kids.
Absolutely. And I'm kind of curious, did your school put a lot of pressure on you for like data and testing and seeing growth? Because I think that, what you said illustrates how stressful it is for teachers to try to create like magic unicorn test scores when there's all these issues going on.
So data, yes. Testing, not quite as much. And I think that's mostly just I'll say testing kind of, and I'll get into why. Data, yes. Always with the grades, keep the grade book updated. At the end of the day, I had to fill out like these little, for any students that had behavior plans, I had to fill out like a little form at the end of the day on PBIS. I had over 20 of them. Okay, 20 of them out of 150 kids. I had 20 behavior plans that I had to fill out. And of course, I never quite, I knew that somebody was looking at them, but I never really completely understood what that data was being used for. So there's always the voice in the back of my head that's kind of like, why are you having to spend so much time on this? Because it takes time to do 20 of them. And of course, it's attaching a number to something that is ultimately kind of hard to quantify, right? In terms of testing, kind of yes, but also no. So the way the schools are set up here is I was science, but there was no, if I remember right, there was no standardized test for science until 8th grade. So I wasn't quite having so much pressure there, but the expectation still was, in a unicorn world, the expectation was that, they would have an end of quarter test. There obviously though, especially since we were all on this new curriculum, and of course, we weren't given enough training for the curriculum. The curriculum director, she tried her absolute best with what she was given, and the curriculum director, she was amazing. And I mean it, she did her best, but that's kind of one of the reasons that I'm like, there are people above their heads that they have to please. They also only have so much time, and honestly, they're given unrealistic expectations to work with, so even there, it's like I'm kind of on the side of a lower mid-level admin, because oftentimes they're given expectations that are just as unreasonable as the expectations on the teachers, and it just kind of trickles down and trickles down. But with testing, the expectation, or I'm honestly just going to say the hope was there would be a quarterly test. In reality, did that happen? No, of course not, because it's like I have a vague idea of what I'm supposed to be doing with this curriculum. But it's, again, like I said earlier, it wasn't resonating with the students. So trying to be at the pace that was intended was just not something that was happening. I tried my best, but it just it just wasn't happening. And some of that was definitely just, maybe some of my own weaknesses, or just, again, the lack of training on exactly how to teach to this style, which I hadn't done before. But and like I didn't, there weren't really like any professional consequences for me, because again, the curriculum director, she did say, like, this is a new curriculum. I know that you want what you want, but you need to just understand you may not get what you want. So she that woman, she really did stick up for the science teachers, like all the science teachers in the district there. Like, she said, this is what we're hoping for, and I know that reality and what we want are not going to match up. So that was good. But with the data, yeah, the big thing with the data that sticks out to me is those daily behavior things that just, once again, I'm just like, what am I doing these for? I don't understand what the heck I'm doing these for. Oh, and of course I had to have like a log of, any communication home. We had rooms, which I kind of give credit in the fact that it creates like its own paper trail of some of the, so it kind of creates data without you having to like log the data somewhere else, which is very handy. But yeah, there was a lot of data collection, and I'm going to use the acronym. I'm going to use the acronym here. A lot of it was just a bunch of CYA. So
You actually reminded me of something when you were talking. I was at a particular school district, and kind of somewhere towards maybe like the middle of the final semester, we were told you have to have all of this stuff for a portfolio, like all of these different assessments, tracking like growth. You have to have all of this stuff. You have to have all this evidence. And there was like all these different standards. And I just went into freak out mode. And I'm like literally re-giving kids tests so I can have all of this data and trying to find evidence and artifacts for all of these things. When I get into my final evaluation, my principal takes the folder, doesn't open it, plops it in his file cabinet and says, that's just to have it there if I ever need to look at it. And he just gives me his evaluation of me that he already had written out. And it was a good one, thank goodness, this year. But I was just like, I have probably spent 17 to 25 hours compiling and trying to find artifacts and do all this stuff. And I eventually figured out most of those things is just, if anybody ever happens to need proof for your existence, justification for your existence, it's in a file somewhere, or trying to avoid a lawsuit or something. But there's just so much of that in education, since teachers aren't trusted to be doing their job.
Yes. And you just reminded me that this is one that I think I had largely erased from my brain, but what you said reminded me, there was, I can't even remember the structure because it was so complex and convoluted and so weird. But yeah, I had some kind of here's the different teaching standards that the state has, and you need to collect artifacts for these ones, and we're going to be looking at these ones if we come into your classroom. And yeah, like even at the start of the year, I could feel myself like, kind of freaking out a little bit about it. And my method was often like, I just kept like a, before I, put in my resignation, I kept a Word document that kind of listed like, okay, this, collect these things, and then just like creating like a little check mark, like, okay, I have this. I just need to I need to get a screenshot of this email thread as proof that I communicate home, or this, my rooms post. That was another thing, is I had to post assignments on rooms, even though like we all knew like 3 people are looking at it. I had to post school announcements on rooms. I had to post once weekly on rooms about whatever we're doing. And again, out of 30 students in each class, roughly 30 students in each class, how many families are actually looking at it? Less than 10.
Definitely. Well, we've covered so much awesome content here today. I am curious. This is a question I like to ask people toward the end of the interview. If you had a magic wand and could change anything in education, what would you change?
Class size.
Hey.
Class size is the first thing that I would change. And the reason that I would change class size is because I feel like so many of the problems that happen just in a classroom, all of them are influenced negatively by classes that are too big. Like I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, changing class sizes fixes everybody's problems 100% of the time, because no, of course it doesn't. But it is something but like cutting class sizes. So I keep throwing out the number 30. Let's say that we change all class sizes to be 20. Okay. I would still say 20 is too many for a truly optimal learning environment, but it's definitely a lot more manageable. And if I could just wave that magic wand, I would probably say 15. 15 is the max. 15 is the maximum class size that one teacher can have. If you want to cram even one more student into that room, there's another adult in the room. But ideally, that wouldn't be a thing. But I say class sizes because if you have 15 students in, let's say, a 45-minute class period, that teacher has the time and the bandwidth to actually have a one-on-one conversation with each student, check in with that student, meet that student where they're actually at, and build a relationship with all of those students. I was waiting to get that term in there because we hear it all the time. Additionally, so if you have smaller classes, if you start having a behavior issue, it's a lot easier to identify where the issue might actually be coming from and address it. If you have smaller class sizes, the teacher isn't swamped with nearly as much grading to try and keep up on. I can't imagine for like an English teacher, right, who's trying to get students to write entire essays. How much time does it take to actually grade 100 plus essays? And it's like I can't even fathom that. I never had to worry about that too much because I'm in science, and the curriculum that we used didn't really emphasize like long form writing, and that was I have kind of mixed feelings about that, but I digress. But I can't fathom the amount of time that would take. Smaller class sizes would make all that data that we're supposed to collect a lot easier to actually collect. There would be far less students to actually keep track of. Teachers could actually get to kind of know their students again to build those relationships that we keep hearing about are so important. And I'm just thinking, how am I supposed to build an actually meaningful relationship with 150 kids? It's like, I can't do that. Like, that's not even a slightly reasonable expectation. So it would be class sizes, because class size has an effect on everything that happens in a classroom. And I think that just out of control class sizes are one of the biggest problems in education. And I do feel like it's one of those that seems so like it should be so easy to change. And yet we continue to not change it. And I know the reason ultimately comes down to, money. But it would be so it's one of those things. It is probably the one problem above any other that I feel like we could change, and we're making an active decision to not change it.
Absolutely. Well, Catherine, this has been such an awesome and enjoyable interview. I think everything you said will relate to so many people. It's related to me. And audience, thank you so much for watching. If you ever want to interview with me, you can email me at teachertherapytrish@gmail.com. And I appreciate you subscribing, liking this video. And thanks again for watching. We'll see you guys next time. Bye for now, everybody.